Hey there, everyone. So, just wanted to point out before the video starts that this is about 20 something minutes of an hour-long live seminar and Q&A that I did exclusively for our community Slack group. And so if you want to see the full version, and you also want to participate possibly in our future live seminars and Q&As, then click the link in the bio, join the Slack group, it's totally free, and we also release back files and prep materials on whatever topics are relevant on a bi-weekly basis. So if that sounds like something you want to be a part of, click the link in the description and join. Our next seminar is going to be on this upcoming Wednesday at 5 p.m. PST. So yeah, hop in the Slack. Hope to see you there and enjoy the video. This is my seminar on weighing strategy. So let's get into it. First of all, we'll start with the basics, right? We'll start with what is weighing? What it is direct comparison between two arguments. And this is something that happens all the time in debate, right? So let's say you're running an economy argument and your opponent is running a war argument, right? What you would be doing is you would be comparing these. Hey, which one is more important, right? Should we care about preventing conflict or should we care about making the economy grow? If you're defending the economy, you might say something along the lines of like, okay, we should care about the economy growing because it's something that's more predictable, and economic growth is a lot more probable of something to cause as opposed to war. But if you're defending war, you might say, well, war is a much bigger magnitude problem than a lack of economic growth is, because it kills a bunch of people, and lack of economic growth doesn't do that. Weighing also is tethered to two fundamental concepts, right? Probability and magnitude. Um, so this is actually a really important concept for everyone to understand, which is that all weighing is actually a subset of two weighing mechanisms, right? Probability and magnitude. So you've got strength of link, reversibility, time frame, scope, uniqueness, all these other weighing mechanisms that we've kind of invented and added. They're all sort of variations of probability and magnitude, right? So just a brief recap for those of you that might not know what these mechanisms are. Probability is the likelihood of your argument occurring. Magnitude is the severity. Actually, severity is its own thing. I probably shouldn't use that word, but it's also, again, just a subset of magnitude. But magnitude is about how significant your argument is, right? Like how much it affects people. So, for example, climate change is super high magnitude, right? It hurts the whole world, whereas like me stubbing my toe is like not particularly high magnitude. And let's also define our other mechanisms we have here. So reversibility is whether or not something can be undone. Time frame, it's how long something lasts. Scope, it's how broad of a population it affects. Uniqueness, it's whether or not the effect will happen either way. So all of these mechanisms are subsets of probability and magnitude. So for example, magnitude, right? Reversibility is a subset of magnitude. Why is that the case? Because if something is irreversible, that is just a way to say that its magnitude is really high because you can never undo it, and specifically it means its magnitude is permanent, right? Time frame. There are actually two different versions of time frame, right? One is a sort of link level time frame where it's okay, the time frame of your argument, we don't really know what it is because it'll happen super far in the future, right? So for example, if someone has some card that says like by 2050 this thing is going to happen, then you would presumably be like, well, that has horrible time frame because you're just saying like in a super long time, there's a disruption that's going to occur. um, and so that would be a subset of probability, because the idea there is that, okay, if you're saying something is going to occur in 2050, we don't even know, like we have no way to contextualize that. Specifically, we have no way to predict if it's actually going to happen or not, because the world in that far of a time frame is so uncertain. The other version of time frame is magnitude, right? It's the idea that, okay, our impacts here are intergenerational. So that is a form of magnitude, because if something happens not just year one, but years 2, years 3, years 4, etc., that is a much higher magnitude circumstance, right? Um, so now scope, also obviously a subset of magnitude. This one has a lot of overlap with magnitude. It's essentially um, just how many people or how broad of a population something affects. So I'll let you guys sort of like simmer with that information. So next question, why weigh, right? Why do you need to do it? So first and most obvious reason is because there are a lot of arguments in the debate, right? If you have a 3 contention case and your opponent also has a 3 contention case, well, now that's 6 arguments that the judge is looking at. And as the round goes on, maybe you each keep 2 of your contention in the debate or 3 of your contentions, or not each, but maybe there's 2 contentions total or 3, plus some turns and plus a bunch of different things. Any given debate, there's probably going to be 3 or 4 key pieces of offense or something like that. Maybe it's 2, whatever. The point is there will be multiple. And so what the judge has to do is they have to decide, okay, what do I care most about here, right? So if this guy is telling me that he's going to save the economy and this girl is telling me that she's going to prevent a nuclear war, and then her partner is telling me that she's going to create foreign direct investment and that's going to go up, well, like, that's all great, but the judge needs to know what exactly they need to care about the most. And that's the function of weighing, right? Weighing is a way to differentiate your arguments and turn just an argument into a path to the ballot, right? That's kind of the biggest and most important consideration for weighing. One other thing I'll say is that, like I sort of mentioned earlier, when rounds get really, really messy, a lot of the time it's because there wasn't enough weighing. Right? Weighing is all about prioritization. In life and in debate, prioritization is extremely important. When you don't prioritize, you ultimately prevent there from being a strong degree of clarity in the situation that you're in. Because when you're in a debate, right, you've been researching some super niche topic for like a month, and you're making like a billion different points on this topic. And so the biggest problem that no debaters understand is that most of the time your judge is confused, right? Most of the time the judge is listening to the round like, I don't know, like what they're talking about here. I don't know who I'm going to vote for right now. Like, this argument didn't really make sense to me. Generally, they're going to follow, they're going to track, but confusion is one of the most powerful feelings that judges will feel. So weighing helps resolve that issue. So now let's talk about when to weigh, right? Another really important question. Best answer here is to weigh early and often, right? The more weighing, generally speaking, the better. Now, you don't want to go overboard with this, right? You don't want to make your summary like 2 minutes and 30 seconds of weighing necessarily. But you will hear judges say, yeah, we want to hear weighing at a minimum starting in the summary. And generally, it's best to start weighing once you collapse. And generally speaking, teams will collapse. A lot of them will collapse in the second rebuttal. So whenever you actually collapse, you certainly have to weigh, because now you've bottlenecked yourself into less positions. So you need to, since you've sacrificed quantity, you need to make up for that in the quality of your positions. And weighing is an excellent way to do that. One other thing that we will talk about is that you can also weigh turns, right? It's certainly different than weighing a case where you're just weighing mechanisms and all of that stuff. But what you can do with turns is you can come up with a reason why the turn should be preferable to the case, right? So for example, if I'm responding to an argument about how passing the American Rescue Plan is going to help American economic growth, right? I might make a turn that says turn the argument. It'll increase the debt, which will force us to print more money, which will increase inflation, which will decrease US economic growth, right? So now you see the problem. We've got one claim about increasing, one claim about decreasing. Which one is better? And that's where weighing comes into play. So you could weigh that turn on any metric. You could say, for example, this turn outweighs because our evidence is a lot better, right? Evidence isn't a traditional weighing mechanism, but you generally don't necessarily need to use traditional weighing mechanisms all of the time, right? Traditional weighing mechanisms are best and most frequently used on the case proper debate. Traditional weighing mechanisms like the ones I talked about, probability, magnitude, reversibility, blah, 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 they're by no means the end all be all of everything. You know, the most important thing is just that you're making a good argument for why your argument is better than that of your opponent. So you can certainly use things like evidence as a form of quote unquote weighing. So now the question is what to weigh. So what you need to do is you need to choose your best offense, right? And this also kind of goes into a question of what do you ultimately collapse onto, right? That's actually something that I'm currently in the process of making another free lecture on. That'll go on the Debate Drills Academy. If you go to debatedrills.com and you click services, you go to the public forum page. You'll see a bunch of our offerings, all the great things we do and other work you can do with us. At the bottom of that page, you'll see our academy that offers free resources. And that's where my course on collapsing will be. So this kind of pertains to collapsing. But we'll table that question for now and talk more about how you choose your best offense. So it's a mix of two factors, right? And this is invaluable information. I see a lot of teams really struggling with this concept. Um, First, you want high relevance, right? Um, and when you have high relevance, what does that mean, right? That means that when you have an argument, right, you want to be asking yourself, like, how does that argument interact with the arguments that your opponents are making, right? Um, And a high relevance argument will interact well with those arguments. So for example, if your opponent is running a war scenario that impacts out to, 2 million people dying, and you're running a war scenario that impacts out to 50 million people dying, well, that's automatically a high relevance argument because there's a pretty clear, intuitive way why it might outweigh, right? Another way to identify a high relevance argument is just by having a good, well-constructed, clearly warranted argument, right? This is important because a lot of the time, teams will read a 10-second long advantage in the rebuttal that is blippy and is underwarranted. And in that moment, you have a low relevant argument. You also might have an argument with an unclear impact scenario, right? Maybe the amount of people you affect isn't precisely quantified or something of that nature. Okay, that means you have a low relevance argument. It's not that important, and because you haven't really substantiated it that well, right? So then what you have is you have low resistance, right? So you're balancing two oftentimes contradictory considerations when you're choosing what to go for, right? You want to be going for high relevance arguments that will weigh up against your opponent's arguments really well. And then you want to, at the same time, do that with low resistance positions, right? So what does low resistance mean? Low resistance means that your opponents have not extensively responded to the argument. So if I have a 3 contention case and my first 2 contentions receive 5 responses each, and my third contention, wow, I can't just stick this finger up. Great. Okay, and my third contention only receives 2 responses. Well, then my third contention becomes a low resistance argument, right? That's an argument where it's easy to go for. Your opponent isn't resisting you that hard. And it's really important to have this argument because at a high level, debates become a lot about time. And you can frontline 2 responses in 20 seconds. And then you have free offense after, say 40 seconds of the summary after you're done with the extension that you can spend weighing. And so, theoretically, you could just start doing damage on their case after a minute, and you could have a totally weighed contention that's great and that you're winning after a minute of the speech. The only question would be then, is that a high relevance argument that only received 2 responses? If it was, you should go for it because, again, you want to be going for a highly relevant and low resistance argument. Now, the way this ties back into weighing, and this part is really important, is that you want to use weighing to turn low resistance arguments into high relevance arguments, right? So let's say that you're reading a turn in the rebuttal and it's 20 seconds long. Let's say it's an advantage and it has its own impact, right? That may or may not be a high relevance argument, It's probably not something that is automatically something that could always win you the round or anything like that, right? But let's say they drop it, right? That becomes really important now because you have free offense, right? You have a low resistance argument. You actually have a no resistance argument, which is even better. So what you need to do is you need to make that argument into a super high relevance position. And the way you do that is by weighing it. You literally tell the judge why its relevance is so high. You tell the judge why this argument beats all the other arguments in the round on whatever mechanisms, on magnitude, on probability, on time frame, because it's better warranted, because the evidence is better. Whatever it might be, you want to take your argument, you want to make it into a high relevance argument if it is low resistance, and that's an invaluable tip. So the other thing here is that you want to weigh what you want the judge to vote for. Like I talked about before, weighing allows you to transmute it rather allows you to transmute an argument into a path to the ballot, right? And so when you really think that you can win an argument, not even if you think you can win it, if you think it's useful for you to undergo the attempt to win the argument, that is the same moment at which you want to engage in weighing so that you make it something that you want the judge to vote for. If you're not weighing it, very good chance that it doesn't get considered in the decision, especially if you're spending anywhere between 10 and 30 seconds on it, right? 30 is a little much. Let's say in the summary, if you're spending 15 to 30 seconds on it, probably won't even go in the decision, unless you have a super tech judge or whatever. So yeah, hopefully that all makes sense so far. I'm going to briefly stop, make sure we didn't miss anybody. Scrolling through, we did not miss anybody. All right, let's get back to it. All right, so now let's talk about how to weigh, right? Finally. So there's a super, super simple way to make a weighing mechanism. Very simple. 2 parts, right? The first part is why your argument has the weighing mechanism in question. Second part is why their argument does not have the weighing mechanism in question, right? Let me show you an example of what this looks like. Okay, let's say I'm weighing climate change against recession, and I want to make the weighing mechanism of time frame. So I need to do 2 things. A, I need to explain why my argument has the mechanism in question, which in this case is time frame. And B, what I need to do is I need to explain why recession does not have the mechanism in question, which is time frame. So let me show you what that might look like. Climate change outweighs recession on time frame because climate change is an intergenerational impact, and the world is forecasted to continue warming for decades, which will hurt the environment long into the future. Recession does not have time frame because of the boom-bust cycle of the economy, which means that any economic crash, like the Great Recession, for example, will be recovered from in a period of several years once the economy recovers, right? So now we've done 2 things. We've first proved why climate change is an intergenerational long-term problem. We've also proved why recession is a relatively short-term problem that worst case will last for a few years. And so that is how you craft a weighing mechanism. You need to have both of these parts, right? You need to have both of these parts. Let's back up for a minute and assume that you only have one of these parts, right? Let's assume that I'm trying to weigh climate change against recession, but I've only explained why climate change lasts for a really long time, right? Let's say the first thing I said was all that I said. Well, that doesn't prove anything, right? Because I haven't proven that recession doesn't also last a really long time. So then my opponent could just as easily get up in the next speech and say, they say climate change lasts a really long time. Sure, so does recession, right? Recession has intergenerational impacts. It pushes people into poverty and they never get out, blah, blah, blah. And then that's the end of that because now my position is pretty non-unique. And the reason you need both is because judges expect your weighing to be comparative. That is, you need to be directly comparing the positions of both sides or else you haven't fully weighed them because weighing is all about comparison. In addition, you want to be using language of preference, right? That's, again, saying things like, you should prefer this argument because the evidence is more recent, or you should prefer this argument because they haven't even responded to it well at all. Or you should prefer this argument because the warranting is a lot better, right? So this is where the delineation gets a little bit fuzzy, because a lot of people love to argue about what technically is and what technically isn't weighing. Like some people will say like strength of link technically isn't weighing, and some people will say, you know, whatever technically is or isn't weighing. Honestly, like the only two overarching weighing mechanisms that like are fundamental are magnitude and probability, and then everything else is just some type of subset of those two, right? And so I think the clearest delineation that you can make in your mind is that there are weighing mechanisms, right? The traditional ones like magnitude, probability, time frame, reversibility, whatever. And then there is sort of language of preference, where that's where you sort of get into your arguments about you should prefer this argument because the evidence is better, because blah, blah, blah. And in truth, all of these are weighing, right? But the only reason I give you this delineation is because sometimes if you call, for example, an evidence argument a weighing argument, some judges will be like, that's not weighing. Why did you say it was weighing? And so you just kind of want to, mimic the pedagogical understanding that your judges have so that you avoid confusion. All right, so now let's talk about weighing and rebuttal. So what you want to do when you weigh in the rebuttal is, particularly if you're weighing in the first rebuttal, is that you want to weigh a common theme that you won't kick out of. So let me give you an example of this, right? In the final round of Blake, we had two contentions in our case, right? One contention talked about how, like, if we end sanctions on Venezuela, that's going to lead to the proliferation of terrorism in Latin America. Completely fake news argument, by the way, but that was the first contention. The second contention was that if we didn't sanction Venezuela, we would then instead launch a military intervention in Venezuela. Also an iffy argument, but that's not the point, right? The point is that they both had to do with conflict. And so that was sort of a common theme. And I knew that we weren't going to kick out of conflict and still go for case necessarily. And so what I did is in the first rebuttal, I spent like 30 to 40 seconds weighing conflict, right? Because that was a common theme in my case that I knew I won't kick out of, right? But this is really important. You shouldn't spend a whole lot of time. Let's say that you have three contentions, right? Let's say your first contention is about how foreign direct investment is going to go up. Your second contention is about how the environment is going to get better. And your third contention is how you're going to prevent a conflict from breaking out, right? And this is the first rebuttal. You don't want to spend a bunch of time, like in the subsequent speech, just being like, okay, I'm going to go through, and this is the first rebuttal, I'm going to go through and individually weigh each of these three contentions. I'm going to say why foreign direct investment beats their first contention and their second contention and their third contention. And then I'm separately going to say why my second contention beats their first contention and third contention and second contention. Because ultimately, you're probably going to go for one of your contentions, right? Which means that let's say that you make 6 weighing mechanisms and you do 2 per contention, right? 4 of your 6 will be useless, because if you weigh something that you then kick out of, then you've essentially wasted your weighing, right? And sometimes you will kick out of something that you weigh, and that's fine. But you certainly don't want to be like heavily weighing a bunch of disconnected arguments in the first rebuttal and spending a bunch of time doing it on the assumption that you're going to kick out of most of the stuff in your case at some point. So that's why weighing is best to do in second rebuttal, when you've begun to collapse. And again, that's because of the fact that you're a lot less likely to kick out of something that you're collapsing to. And so you're less likely to sort of waste your weighing, as it were. For the rest of this weighing seminar, click the link in the description and join our community Slack group, where we'll be posting a bunch more videos and exclusive back files. See you all there.